Okay, today I'm going to show you how you can take your old Polaroid camera and take pictures with it with standard Ilford multigrade paper. And this is not a very difficult thing, although you do need darkroom chemicals. It does use the standard paper darkroom process. The hardest part about doing this is creating the neutral density filter for the electric eye. Although it's not super difficult, it's just a little bit fussy. So what we want to do, and the reason why we want to do that is because photographic paper is much slower than photographic film. It comes in at an ISO of around 4 or 5. So you need to somehow tell the camera that you've got a lot slower film than the slowest film that Polaroid camera can use, which is 75 ASA. You have to get 75 down to 6, which is about 4 stops. And what happens is after you do that and you take the picture, it'll produce a negative like this. And in the darkroom, you develop it and you put it back to back with a positive, shine light through it, and you get out a positive. And so this is a method that if you do have the darkroom chemicals, which cost around $50, you'll be able to get a Polaroid print for about 50 cents, which is, or 50 or 60 cents, which is why I'm doing this. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is create a neutral density filter. Now I suppose you could just go out and buy a 4-stop neutral density filter and then cut it out and then stick it in there. But another way you can do it is just get an acetate piece of paper, an acetate sheet here, and just get your any kind of pen. I tried this one, but I like the kind of like the wide tip marker, and just kind of draw or try to fill it in here. Okay. And what I found was that you can tell this is not super dark. I would just estimate that might be a 2-stop neutral density. I can't be sure until I test it, and I'll show you how to test it pretty soon. So then I'll wait till it dries and I'll go to the other side and draw some more, so that it's kind of twice as dark. Okay? So I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to cut it square first so that I can test it. And the way to test it, you can just do trial and error, or you can, but that takes a lot of pieces of paper and stuff, or if you have a meter, you can use a meter to test it. So what I'm going to do is get a meter reading, and I'm going to, this meter is kind of cool, it just zeroes out, but I'm going to get a meter reading and let's say put it 3 stops over. Okay, then I'm going to put this over top of the electric eye there, and take another meter reading, and you see that's just about 4 stops under. It's pretty close, so I'm gonna go with that. And so I take this out, if I can get it out. That's how I test to see how dark this is. And the reason why I do both sides is because I've already done one of these. And then we cut this to the hole, the hole size here. And this is just a little bit of, I'm just going to cut a estimate, and then I'll just kind of trim it down the right size. Alright, so there's a little hole. Just drop it right in here. And I've got a pin here somewhere. Maybe, can't find it. Alright, just going to lightly press that in with the scissors. Whoops, kind of bounces in there. And there it is. You have your neutral density filter over top of your electric eye. Now, ideally you want it so that when you do your test exposures, they'll come out right when it's set for a neutral exposure. But you may find that you will have to adjust it front or back depending on the scene or depending on how much contrast there is. What you'll find out first is that Ilford paper is quite contrasty when you are using it. So it's very, and the exposure is really, really sensitive. So you'll find that you'll make a lot of trial and error. Here was my first test picture, very dark, and so then I figured I made that thing a little bit too dark. I was aiming for 5 stops, and it's actually 4 stops that you want it to do. So then the next step is to take your Ilford paper. Obviously I'm not going to use this paper because I'm filming this in the light, and let's say this is a piece of paper and I've got my safe light. I'm working under my safe light inside the darkroom. What I did here, this is just kind of to be helpful. This is my cutter. I just put a piece of tape on here. Put a piece of tape on so that I can butt this up against the tape and just make a cut. And I just used a regular size Polaroid picture as kind of a template. And the reason why I do that is because in the darkroom, it's very difficult to see any of these lines here. So the tape, I can just kind of butt it up there and go, and then when I go this way, I just kind of line it up against the other side of the tape. It's a little bit bigger, and I've got my paper. So let's pretend I'm in the darkroom. This is my 5x7 sheet of paper. Put it through here, make a cut, and then I cut it this way, and I have my piece of paper that I'm going to use for my film. I'm going to do 2 of them, and as an added bonus, you get a couple of sheets that you can use, just really small strips that you can use for test exposures later. So I put all that back. I put all that back inside my photo box, inside the black paper, black bag, and then I have what I have here is a used up Polaroid cartridge. I just take it apart. Okay, that's back, and underneath this has got 2 parts. And this is where the negative sits behind. So I just put the paper with the glossy side out inside my carrier and put this in like this. Snap it all back together. This is all in under the safe light, all under the red light. Otherwise you'll wreck it. So then you have what looks like a Polaroid pack, except with a piece of paper in there instead of a negative. In the dark here, I load it up into the camera, and I'm ready to take it outside. Now, you notice that this thing fell out. The one that I made before doesn't fall out. This one I made a little bit too small, so you'll want to cut this exactly the right size. Okay, so then typically what will happen then is, because your exposure is so long, it's going to be a half a second or more. Inside it's going to be many seconds. You'll want to use this on a tripod. So mount this on a tripod. Make sure it's set for ASA 75. Make sure that the setting is for bright sun or dull day, also with flash, the lower one, so that the lens is wide open. Okay. So then, in order to keep the exposure, the camera from shaking, I've got one of these cable releases. Just snap that on. They're not very easy to snap on. I cock the shutter, I point it at my subject, and take the picture. And you'll notice it's going to be a long exposure. In fact, it's such a long exposure that I'm still holding the shutter down, but whenever I have to keep it held down for the length of the exposure, but for just the purposes of this video, I'll let go of it. You hear the second click, that means that the shutter is closing. So it would have been open for probably half a minute or a minute or more inside this dark room. So then, I take this camera, I can close it if you want, take this camera back into the dark room, on comes the safe light, and you just take it out of the case, and take the case apart under the safe light, and develop the photo just as normal. I use, a lot of people use different chemicals. All I have is Kodak dektol and just standard stop, bath, and fixer. And out comes a negative. Something that looks sort of like this. You'll notice the contrast is quite high. I have yet to experiment with putting multigrade filters in front of the lens to try to lower the contrast on this. But I haven't quite gotten there yet, but I'm going to experiment with that soon. So then you get your, you get this thing when after it's dry, you dry the negative, and then in the darkroom again, you get another piece of photographic paper and you lay this on top of it. Okay? And what I found, just as a helpful tip, is that if you need to press this down firmly against the positive, otherwise it's going to be quite blurry. And you'll notice this print here, I just laid it down like this and thought, oh, that'll be okay. But look how blurry the print came out. Even if this negative lifts off the print just a teeny bit, you're going to get blurs. So you have to get, I use a piece of glass to hold it down, and then you expose it. I found that an exposure of maybe with the enlarger I'm using, it's about 18 seconds at f5.6, and I use the grade 0 filter. Now the reason why I use the grade 0 filter is because the negative was just so contrasty, and even with grade 0, this might be a little bit overexposed, but even with grade 0 it produces quite a high contrast print. So that's the result I get now. I've got a lot of tweaking to do, and there's lots of tips online of how to actually get the best negative you can with the most tonal range and everything like that. This, you can see the negative is very contrasty. And there's techniques like pre-flashing and stuff like that that I haven't messed with yet, but this is just kind of the basic get started video on how to do this. It's kind of exciting because I can use my Polaroid camera again, even if it's under crazy circumstances like having to use a tripod and having such slow film speeds, but it's kind of fun to be able to use it. Okay, that's it. That's how you do it. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below. Thanks.